Well, I started to tell you about this gentleman in this case who had 57 skull fractures in the case, and you can see the magnitude of the injuries that are depicted here. This is a precise recreation of how he presented to the emergency room following a crane accident. And I'm going to talk about that crane accident right now. Cranes are very unique machines. They are wonderful machines. And they allow us to build massive high-rises and construct bridges and all kinds of things. Cranes are really neat instruments or machines. But this particular crane that this man was working around had something on the end of the crane that they use for smashing into stuff and breaking it down, and it's called a headache ball. Now you have to be saying, if you're watching this, why is this lawyer holding up a fishing pole to talk about a crane accident? Well, I'll tell you how it works. Where you have the winch, that we will call the reel, attached to the boom, which will be the rod, and the winch moves up and down like this, you can see the load on the end, depicted by this bobber that I've got here, okay? That where the winch is attached to the boom, you have this effect here. Well, in this case, this load, this headache ball, was severed from the boom. And we were trying to explain it to the jury, and it was very difficult for the jury to understand what had happened. So here's how we did it. We analogized it to a fishing pole. And where the winch, which is the reel, is attached to the boom, everything moves in sequence and nothing, the load is not going to get severed. But watch what happens. I'm going to flip this over now. Watch what happens when we remove the reel, which will be the winch, and we put it, instead of attaching it to the boom, we put it on top of the cabin that operates the crane. In other words, now we have the boom moving independently of a winch which is attached to the top of the housing cabin of the crane. Now watch what happens when we have the winch situated on top of the cabin and we lower the boom. Watch what happens. And that's what happened. The headache ball fell from the boom and crashed into this man's head. Now, they didn't start calling it a headache ball because of his accident. They'd call it the headache ball before, because if this thing ever hits anything, to say it gives you a headache is an understatement. But that's how we proved to the jury that the structure of this crane, by having the winch on top of the cabin, separating from the boom, caused the load to be separated when someone lowered the boom with the load on the end. There's a device that is now on these cranes called an anti-tube blocking device. At that time, they didn't put those on cranes, and now they do. And those devices protect against severing the load like this under these circumstances. This fellow lived through this trial, and I'll tell you a funny story about it. At the time we tried this case, multi-million-dollar verdicts were not that common. We see more of them now. But we asked the jury for $5 million in his case. And so when the jury came back, they found liability, fault of the crane manufacturer that they said caused the injury, which resulted in this terrible event, this terrible injury for this man. And they awarded exactly $5 million. Which, of course, we were thrilled with, because at that time, it was a tremendous result. It's still a very substantial amount of money, but at that time, it was really historic. So we were out that evening celebrating, and we were so proud, so happy for him. And so he said to me, he said, "Mr. Kerrigan, do you mind if I ask you a question?" And I said, no. Well, I failed to tell you that earlier in the day we had at the trial, had considered asking for $3 million to $4 million. But we decided, well, we'll go ahead and ask for all we think we could possibly get under the circumstances of this case. And so he looked at me and he said, Mr. Kerrigan, do you mind if I ask you a question? I said, well, of course not. You can ask me a question. He said, why didn't you ask for more money? Well, you never know what the jury's going to do. And sometimes, if you ask for too much money, then the jury rightfully says these lawyers are just greedy and they're asking for way beyond what should be done. But in this man's case, $5 million was a very fair verdict, and we ended up settling the case after that jury award.